This seems like a crass question, Dermot, but how is projection technology developing in such a fast-moving world with so many different demands on it from the end user's point of view?
Well, it's a good question because projection has been effectively, I wouldn't say under threat, but there have been a number of other technologies, for example, LED wall technology, flat panel technology, which have in themselves filled many of the market niches where projection used to be the default process. So for example, in schools and colleges, there are very many cases where one would ask, well, why do I need a front projection screen when I can get a 60-inch flat panel for not very much money and solve the need? LED walls, very bright, manage in an ambient environment, a high ambient light environment very well, can go outdoor in various forms, produce incredibly punchy images, and as the video processing associated with them has become more sophisticated, one used to look at the images and say, well, I wouldn't want to watch a movie on that, it's okay to look at an advert, but now they're pretty stunning overall image quality. So one starts to say, well, a lot of the business applications where projection once was the only solution have been filled by other technologies. And therefore, we asked ourselves, who wants a projector? And particularly, the question that's concerned me greatly over the last few years, who wants a 3-chip high-end projector? In our case, DLP 3-chip, but in other cases, other technologies. And therefore, the conclusion I came to was, frankly, give the customer what they need. Come up with a projector what's good about a projector? All right? It's a small box that can make a big image over there with very little other infrastructure. So make it a small box and make it easy. And the route that technology was moving along, laser phosphor technology transformed the business. We moved from xenon lamps to high pressure mercury lamps and then to laser phosphor, where this constant unpredictability, frankly, of lamp technology was a problem. So we gave people life and robustness of product. But as we got brighter and brighter, the projectors got bigger and bigger and more power hungry. And that puts a stress on every aspect of the design, the development, the installation, the integrator's task, the servicing of the things. When you've got a projector that's 130 kilograms, and maybe 3.5 or 4 kilowatts power, there's a fair bit of overhead to managing that. So we really set ourselves a goal about 3 years ago of considering whether it was possible to separate the light source and the projector down to what's fundamentally required to be in the projector that has to be local to the light modulators, and what could be in a service room 20, 30, 50, 100 meters away.
Are you able to bespoke manufacture without it being too costly? So if a customer, if the scale is big enough, could actually customize their requirements for a machine. Is that not feasible? Is that possible? Is manufacturing that lean to allow that to happen?
We've got, without being specific to my business.
Indeed.
We have a dual capability.
Yeah.
We have this small team who can respond and create tailored versions of product with a very large manufacturing capability overseas, and my feeling is that should be used as appropriate. There was this mantra, particularly in the UK, which said it must be good to manufacture everything in China. And my view is it must be good to manufacture as appropriate to the volume and to the needs of the customer. And therefore I think the trick is to use the best of both worlds without being dogmatic about it, just be pragmatic.
There's a lot more emphasis going to have to be placed on clever manufacturing, which is something we're particularly keen on. I think if you're going to be able to cope with an agile, companies are very agile, it's a volatile market, margins are diminishing in all kinds of ways because we're dealing with different environments, competition on other types of products. Everywhere we look, really, there's an expectation of all kinds of functionality being delivered for much more cost effectively than sometimes we're able to manufacture it for. It seems that I've never known a market that's so under so much pressure to innovate, yet do it at such a ridiculously aggressive price, other than in higher value applications where you expect that price to be justified.
Well, we're kind of used to a fairly short product life cycle. There's this constant stepping of functionality. Okay, lumens and resolution have always been the things, but we sort of got to a point with 2K that the market was catching up with. Actually, the biggest selling projection technologies in the world, I think, are still XGA resolution. However, at the high end, you've got to differentiate, and sometimes people, for example, buy 4K projectors who don't yet need 4K and indeed don't have the rest of the infrastructure behind it, but would want to forward invest in projectors which were capable of it. It is difficult, particularly when investing in electronics, for example, to put, it can take a year to develop a new front end for a projector with video inputs, and you've got to make choices about DisplayPort, what version of DisplayPort, what version of HDMI, what's next. And we made a decision several years ago that we would try to move away from, at the highest end, we would move away from the ASIC-based approach and go to FPGA-based processing, because then you're using IP rather than hardware, and you've got some design flexibility and can keep updating. Right? In the smaller projectors, one would tend to stick to ASIC-based processing because you've got the volume and very price sensitive. And there's this trade-off between, okay, getting the cheapest possible unit price versus return on the investment in a product. And therefore, in our highest end projectors, in our 4K and our multi-view and our 8K projectors, they're FPGA-based technology. But in our single chip projectors, it's generally ASICs. That would seem to be an appropriate mix.
I thought as the years would progress, ASICs would be the future actually. There'd be more flexibility, we'd be dealing with new materials, we'd be able to customize at will and everything else, and that's not happened, unfortunately. The price has been different. Even in electronics, it's been a very slow-moving game. And it's not the future we thought might happen. It's sort of complicated things in a way. There isn't much of that versatility that what I'd like to have happened at this point, really. And it's down to electronics, I think, isn't it? It's just investment, and tooling is just very expensive.
I'm not an electronics engineer. I have a team.
Well, the future's in software now, isn't it? Clearly,
Software's never ending. I think there are multiple levels of software and firmware in a product. There's the embedded software, which is the stuff which makes the light come on when the internal management of the infrastructure of the projector software. Then there's the embedded software for the user interface, and then as one moves out, and what's become increasingly important is the stuff which, web-served control applications, allowing people to control multiple projectors and integrate that within their greater installation, for example. That stuff starts to matter, and that's a continuing investment. That never stops.
That's quite a complex procedure, isn't it? You're not just dealing with the functionality of the box, but it's its ability to interoperate or work, say, on a network or a mixed environment, which is an equally different equation, and you almost got two different product sets in the same box. Really,
and with short product life cycles and new variants continually appearing, one challenge is to say, right, I've got to keep upgrading my user interface software to accommodate all of these different variants. However, there are some techniques amongst software guys where, for example, the projector announces itself via a plugin and it declares what its functionality is, for example, and then that allows the user interface control to automatically upgrade its compatibility with those units. So there are things that can be done to help with that process.
So what in the short term is the future do you see for technology, for projection technology? Is it going to be, it's a long-term game really, isn't it? There's so many variables in the market at the moment.
There have been times over the last years where I've considered that, for example, what video interfaces are you going to use? What chipsets are you going to go for? And you're aware at the time that there's a risk to that decision, because you're going to have to bet on a horse, and it's going to take a year to 18 months for that new product to emerge. And you can't, you know, a company our size can't bet on multiple horses. And if you get it wrong, you've made a big mistake. The FPGAs sort of helped with that. The modularity of products helps with that, because it actually shortens the product life cycle and enables you to react. So for example, the light sources can be updated independently of the projectors. So this whole modularity approach, which I tend to go on about, I recognize, really does help every aspect of the product life cycle, both through the R&D process, because the individual blocks themselves are more manageable projects than taking the whole and trying to integrate it from the beginning. You know, I might compare it with, you know, completely different scale, but you know, the Crossrail project. I would be very tempted to look at that and say, don't try and open all those stations at once. Get a little bit working, and then expand it from there. And a modular concept kind of allows you to do that. So I'm a bit of a fan, really. From a global viewpoint, I think RGB laser technology is going to come to dominate. I think laser phosphor technology, which, you know, blue lasers to stimulate phosphor to emit a broad spectrum, have been brilliant. They moved the whole industry along, and you won't see a single lamp-based projector on our stand now, and I'm not sure any of our competitors. But I kind of feel that technology is leveling off, because there are some fundamental difficulties with it in terms of energy density. Its great merit was that blue lasers were cheap, essentially. Now red and green lasers are becoming much more accessible, very reliable, and much more moderately priced. And we've taken an approach of starting at the very high end to create this modular solution, which wasn't made possible until the red and green lasers became, you know, their performance has improved and their price point is coming down fast. And therefore, what was an extraordinarily expensive technology 3 or 4 years ago is now going to become mainstream.